Hey, Anthony, it's Joe. I just wanted to say thank you for your episode and your bonus episode on using music and using mind crime in your games. That sounded like an amazing game, dude. I've never run a game where I was switching between systems based on what happened in the story. And I might be getting that wrong, but that's kind of what it sounded like you were doing. You were switching between having them be the vampires and the mages and the werewolves and stuff. That's freaking cool, dude. That's really cool. And yeah, why am I not surprised to learn that you used to be on radio, man? You have a voice for radio, which is way better than me, who's got a face for radio. Anyway, man, peace out.
Just in case opening with someone else's voice, and Joe, by the way, you have a fantastic voice. Just in case that opening has left people in doubt about what they are listening to, you are indeed listening to the Casting Shadows podcast. If you'd like to know more about the ways that I interact online about role-playing games, all that information will be at the end of the episode, so we don't have to bore the people who already know. And if you are curious, you know where to go directly to find out. Okay, what is this episode about? Well, I had the great pleasure of receiving some voice messages from Karl Rodriguez from the GMologist Presents, and I had that nice message from Joe Richter of the Hindsightless podcast, and so we'll answer some of the questions that they raised in their messages, and we'll extend the topic a little bit further to the idea of troupe-style play. In Joe's message, which you heard at the start of the show, he brought up a little bit of uncertainty about whether or not the players involved in the Mage Chronicle, based on Operation Mindcrime that I described in the previous two episodes, he brought up the question of whether or not they were switching back and forth between other characters in other chronicles. And yes, Joe, you understood it perfectly. That's exactly what was going on. So, in the process of play, we had specific nights for specific chronicles. So people generally knew that if they showed up on Wednesday night, we would be playing Vampire, or if they showed up on Sunday night, we'd be playing Dark Ages Vampire, or whatever. However, sometimes those chronicles had additional chronicles which grew out of them, which involved mortal characters of some kind, or some other related supernatural characters, or some other band of related vampire characters, or werewolf characters, or mage characters, or whatever. Every once in a while, I would bring out a different set of character sheets and say, we're going to play these guys tonight, or we're going to play these guys for this, for this hour, or for this scene, or whatever. So what made all of this possible was that the setting was persistent, and it was organized in my mind, and hopefully in the players' minds, by year and by specific events. Before this particular NPC appeared or disappeared, before so-and-so was killed, before, this particular year, or that particular Christmas, that kind of thing. So we had a sense of when things happened relating to characters and relating to events in play. And we were playing a lot. So all of this stuff was kept very firmly in mind just by socializing with each other and playing so many different characters, but in the same setting. Sometimes separated by a year, sometimes from the perspective of who you're playing today, the character you played yesterday was in your future. Often they were in the past. And so what this allowed me to do was to play through the same events from different perspectives, separated by a lot of time. So the scene that I mentioned in the war story in the bonus episode of the black van allowing a group of unaffiliated mages to use their magical abilities to mind control the crowd and start a riot. That scene was played through from different perspectives from different groups. So two different groups of vampires, and a more established elder group of vampires played through that, as well as some younger up-and-coming, more precariously placed in vampire society vampires played through that, as well as two different groups of mages, the ones that I talked about and ones that played through that same scene later on after I came to Korea. So I found that this is all part of my notion of preparation for improvisation. And there are always things, I don't know, I find that when you think about things afterward, there's so many viewpoints or perspectives or ideas that come to mind that you say, oh, I wish I had noticed this at the time, and I wish this had stuck out to me at the time. I would have described it better, or I would have described it differently. And what I'm not talking about is kind of a time travel where all of those characters I just mentioned were all in the same place. They all could have seen each other. But what I mean is they were all affected by that moment. Some of them were in direct proximity to it and were interacting with it, and some were directly affected by it, and some simply heard about it or came upon the scene afterward, or were in that place just before, and that kind of thing. So some of the people who were playing in it, were nodding their heads because they realized where they were in space and time, and now they had a chance to learn a little bit more about what that mysterious van thing was all about, or what was it about, these rumors of riots that were spread. And for other people in the room, it was a completely new experience that didn't have any relation to anything else that they had heard before or had played through before. And I like all of that. So the group was used to playing multiple characters. They were used to playing usually only one character per night, unless a character died or unless it suddenly became really apparent that the character that needed to be involved in this was one of their other characters, right? So if the group needed to negotiate with a particular werewolf or with a particular vampire, or if they were convinced that somebody had done something and tracked them down, then a player might switch to that character in the moment and play through it. But generally speaking, we didn't do a lot of shifting in the moment. But we had this very large cast of characters. We had different nights set aside for each of the campaigns, which in Storyteller are called chronicles. So they all tied together, and they were all nested within each other, kind of like one of those Russian dolls. So the main doll holding everything together was the original Vampire Chronicle, which ran for 6 years, and then inside each of them there were other main holding chronicles, like the main Werewolf Chronicle and the main Mage Chronicle and the main Wraith Chronicle. And each one of those had smaller chronicles inside it from time to time that involved mortals or involved mixed groups of supernaturals and the like. And sometimes those characters were only used once or twice, or they were used for some evening where not enough people could show up, or they were used for some other event. But all of those things were held together by the Vampire Chronicle. And so just before I left for Korea, we were able to do kind of a bringing all the loose ends to a close kind of experience, where that main chronicle was shut down, and people were playing characters that they hadn't played for years, and people were playing through the scene on one night from one perspective and playing through it on another night from a different perspective in a different location. And that was kind of fun. And then about a year after that, I had an event to talk about, what was really going on. And so that was kind of fun. This is how I like to approach campaigns when I have the opportunity to have a persistent universe and to have the events and the stories created by play be honored in future play and become things that we react to, that become a part of the fabric of the experience of the characters' lives. And the ability to do that requires a stable group, and it requires kind of a larger number of people in order to give it any real weight, and an opportunity for people to be involved in some of it, but not all of it, so that as they shift from game to game and time to time over the years of the group being together, there are different surprises, and there are different nostalgic moments, and different memories are called upon, and different groups of people get to experience things that they were and weren't involved in, all in the same kind of stew of experience. So it's what I like to do. It hasn't something I've been able to do a lot here, and I'm definitely finding that playing online has made everything harder, but that's something for another day.
Hey, Ruin Singer, this is the GMologist. Thank you so much for that music in preparation episode. I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad to. I really actually enjoyed listening to how you incorporated mind crime, especially into your mage game. It definitely has given me inspiration to look down and look at my favorite kind of genres. Maybe even Judas Priest. I mean, they do a lot of like this robots and post-apocalyptic thing, right? So maybe it'd be cool to have that music in the background and playing while I run games, and use that to inspire a post-apocalyptic Empire in the East type of game. Umerica, I don't know. Umerica seems more hairband than heavy metal, right? But thanks again for that, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for that call, Karl. I think that Judas Priest, in terms of inspiration for role playing games, is like lightning in a bottle. There's so many things that they can provide inspiration for, and it's funny what you're talking about, being inspired by, like the cover for Screaming for Vengeance, and the idea of the painkiller and the sinner and the jugulator, and all the things that we have given to us, these mighty machines of destruction and metal, brought to us by Priest down through the decades. And I say it's funny that you mention that, because a couple of years ago, I had published a scenario for the design mechanism for their Luther Arkwright role-playing game, and that led to negotiations with a different company to do something else for Mithras, and it ultimately fell through. There's a death in the family here that kind of took all the fun out of the world. But the pitch that I had given them was a post-apocalyptic world with the wreckage of machines like those, directly inspired by Judas Priest, buried in the wastelands all around these small communities. And the notion would have been that as the campaign unfolded, more of these things might be discovered, and in a sense, an arms race toward revitalizing them and getting them back into action. I guess partly inspired by Voltron from that perspective, and I was really looking forward to putting pen to paper, metaphorically, putting fingers to keyboard, as it were, to get that going. But anyway, I put it out there as an idea that I definitely think this is a cool idea. This has a lot of legs to it, and playing the music in the session, or not playing the music in the session, just using it to support your own prep, and having it playing in the back of your mind, as the prelude to description and inspiration for the players. I think that could be a lot of fun. And so it's either a case of great minds thinking alike or fools refusing to differ, but I'm going to go with the former.
And though oddly my genre is heavy metal and heavier, the song that's in my head right now, especially since you mentioned using covers to change tunes or change the scene, is the Hazy Shade of Winter, right? You can do the Simon and Garfunkel for an opening scene, and then maybe it's you mentioned Call of Cthulhu a lot, maybe it's a Call of Cthulhu late 60s, 70s, and then you do something generational, and suddenly we're in the 90s, and you listen to the Bangles' Hazy Shade of Winter. I don't know why. I'm spitballing here, I'm sure, but inspired by that cool idea of having covers. There's so many awesome and funky covers that are out there, so you can deep dive into like a, you know, the corridor of covers, as Liquid Metal calls it, on Sirius XM. So again, thanks, and I'll holler at you soon.
Karl, that's exactly how my mind goes. Going down the rabbit hole, as it were, or this corridor of covers, and when you really start looking for different cover versions of a particular song, it's sometimes surprising that there aren't any, but it's also surprising that there are hundreds. And when you get into the idea of generation games for Call of Cthulhu, or the idea of alternate realities, like from the old TV show Sliders, or from Luther Arkwright that I was talking about before, or the game Broken Rooms that I was talking about before, the subtle differences, between a rock version or a metal version or a country version of a particular tune gives you a lot of flexibility. But often we don't realize, I think, that some major hits, I guess often from a person's teenage years, the teenager in question often doesn't realize that their new favorite song is actually a cover or remake of an older song. And later in life, when they start to curate their music collection, they discover that, well, like 50 artists recorded this before the one that you love. And that can be really cool. An old bluesy or soul version of a song that later becomes an industrial song. I guess I'm thinking here of Tainted Love, that I came to know first via Soft Cell, but is actually a much older song than we might think. That notion, or that ability to have that wide a range of flexibility in a song turns out to give you a lot of inspirational power, and set up a lot of different situations for play to start in than we might have realized. Or as a closer, as the big revelation that we're not in Kansas anymore, or we are in Kansas, but it's not our Kansas, and suddenly everything is really different. But I really like it as a notion of a generation game. Like, our perspective is continuing on the meta level, on the player level, although everything is different from the perspective of the characters that we're playing now in this troupe of characters that we're playing down through the years. And having that through line, that musical through line that can actually appear as a part of play, I think is an important and very cool way to go about things. So, like you, I find that a lot of the songs that I end up wanting to use, or feeling comfortable using, like I recognize that how I use them, if I use them in play, how I use them will be recognized and maybe appreciated by a mixed audience of listeners, is that I wind up with pop songs or more popular groups, and then can play a metal version of something, or I can make things harder or move things into a completely different genre. And so, yeah, Hazy Shade of Winter is a fantastic example. And I think if you do a search for Hazy Shade of Winter covers, you're also going to discover that it was done again by the frontman for Chemical Romance. And so you can have three very distinct versions of that song from very different decades. And that would definitely play into a generation game or a legacy game really nicely. I also like to listen to really heavy music, or really grinding music, like Candlemass, or put in Dark Tranquillity or Slayer or Death. But these can have a very polarizing effect on the people who are in the room, if you're lucky enough to have people in the room with you and you're not forced to play online. So again, this is one of the things that again pushed me into not using music in play, but using instead music to run in the back of my head, to run in my memory, or to run during preparation, and to assign the feeling, or to assign the texture of that particular music to how I'm going to describe a person, place, or thing. And so, if I were a deep lover of pop music, I think I would still be using music more overtly in play. But given my predilections of seeing the shock and horror on people's face when Skinny Puppy comes on, I had to reevaluate its immediate effects, and then notice that even with the pop songs, that for that moment, play stops and people are enjoying the song rather than being in the moment of play. And that's not one of my particular goals, but it might be another group's way to immerse themselves in the enjoyment of the moment. But anyway, thanks again for your call. So those two callers, in trying to answer the questions or the suggestions that they raised, brought up an intersection of two distinct ideas, and these ideas require each other in order to exist. And that's the idea of generational games that Karl mentioned, and troop-style play that Joe pointed out, where one player has multiple characters, and where one campaign in generational play exists in a variety of time periods. So, in both cases, we wind up with players having access to multiple characters. Now, troop-style play can work like it does in Ars Magica, for example, where on any given night you might be playing one of several different characters that you have designed, like you have a stable of characters. And tonight you might be playing a mage, and someone else might be playing that mage's assistant, and someone else might be playing the huntsman, and someone else might be playing a guard, and someone else might be playing just a simple servant. And they're embroiled in some kind of mystery. But the next time you settle down to play, those roles have been switched. Someone else is playing a servant, not the same servant. Someone else is playing a guard, someone else, or maybe two people are playing mages this time, and so on and so forth. So everyone has multiple characters, and depending on the situation of play, choices are made about who is playing who when. That's one kind of troop-style play. Another kind is when there are multiple characters in a scene, and you are playing multiple characters in a scene. And all you really have to juggle is that you try not to get involved in conversations with yourself. And this is something that game masters need to develop as a skill themselves anyway. And so if you have a group of game masters in the play group, then this is an easy skill to transmit to others if it seems odd or awkward. But even if you don't, the idea is that the social dynamics of a particular scene will require certain people to be in the foreground and other people to be in the background. And we can see this really well highlighted and supported in the Modiphius game, Star Trek Adventures for 2D20. So it's not the only game that requires this. It's not the only game that uses it as a normal part of play, but that's a particularly good way to go about it. The other way is where characters aren't particularly tied to one particular player, where anyone can take on a role by need. And this really has a minimizing effect on how often you end up having to talk to yourself. And Star Trek Adventures is one where that is also one of its basic underpinning concepts, is that these characters are created, and there are secondary characters in scenes aboard starships in Star Trek, and somebody needs to play them, and this might shift as we move through play. You might be playing the navigator in the first scene of the night, and then later on during an away mission, you're playing your main character, and someone else is playing that secondary character because their main character is tasked with something else. So this being willing to shift through different characters, depending on the particular moment that you're playing through, some people can find a lot of fun. Others find it very tiring or stressful, and they worry about getting it right. They worry about consistency and this sort of thing. But it's kind of interesting that if you turn that on its head, if you remove consistency as a responsibility and instead turn consistency into a discovery, then you can find out, you can kind of remember that we're playing a campaign. Like so many times we create a character just before play. We don't really have a sense of what their personality is going to be like. We don't know how we're going to interact with people as that character. Are they a bit of a bully? Are they condescending? Are they sweet and lovable? Are they a team player? Do they have to be convinced of things? Sometimes we don't know until it's required of us to know in the moment who that character is. And that discovery process is a lot of fun. And we continue to discover that character every time we play them as we go through the campaign. And sometimes that discovery process can be years in the making. But when you suggest to someone that they take on, hey, could you play this NPC in this moment? Or could you play, Roger's character while he's not here? Or this kind of stuff. Then people give themselves extra stress. Oh, I don't think I could play him the way that Roger plays him. But we're still playing in a campaign, and that character's personality is still unfolding. It doesn't have to be a source of stress. It can be an interesting point of discovery. And we're still imagining the character. We're not imagining you playing the character. We're seeing you, we're hearing you, but we're imagining the character. And in our ears, it can sound just as much like the character as when Roger played them. And I think that's interesting. Another game you can see this happen in is called Circle of Hands, which is a game written by Ron Edwards. And in that, one of the presets of play is that every time you play, you'll be switching through the cast of characters that have been created. So the rule is that you can't play the same character back to back. So you can alternate between two characters, but that's as close as you can get to playing the same character twice in a row. So there, right from the get-go, one of the points of playing that game instead of playing some other game is to see this effect, right? So maybe you have a group of 5 people, and so there will be 10 characters that are created. Now, some of these characters are going to die as we go along, so the pool of characters is going to diminish over time, but we're going to have 10 characters to choose from, and the 5 people will choose 5 characters, and the next time, those people can't play those characters. So people could choose new characters, right? The other 5 that weren't played, or they could choose the 5 that are already in play and move them around the group in some way. Or there could be a mix of those things. Some people could bring in characters that weren't played last time, and other people could adopt a character that someone else played the last time, but no one's playing the character that they played last time. This can sound very weird or very challenging, but of course winds up being just another way to play a role-playing game, and one that a lot of people, it turns out that they really enjoy. Right? And so I have been involved in running generation games and doing troop-style play for pretty much as long as I can remember now. And where these concepts were formalized for me, where I learned what to call them, and I found a way to more quickly describe it, and I don't know, having it in a game book seems to give it more legitimacy, right? So if you're trying to persuade someone who's a little bit resistant, you can say, well, this very famous game that you've heard of does it. And they're like, oh, really? Well, okay, let's try. But anyway, we've been doing it for as long as I can remember. And, think back to any of you listening who were playing D&D in the late 70s and 80s, of course. Some of you will have played with henchmen, and some of you will have lost characters in dungeons and had to, draw from the pool of henchmen or followers or hirelings in order to justify the existence of your new character in the scene. And this is exactly troop-style play. And some of you may have been involved in characterizing those hirelings and henchmen so that there was conversation, there was backtalk, and there were side missions and whatnot involving these background characters. And again, that's troop-style play. So it's really been there from the beginning. It's just how we look at it and how we mechanize it and how we decide to enjoy it. So in a generation game, we can follow a family down through time as a mystery or as a recurring problem continues to unfold across the decades or across the centuries. So in a game of Call of Cthulhu, you could play Cthulhu Dark Ages, right? You could set it during the Roman times, and then you could set it during the Middle Ages, that this problem has come round again, and then you could set it during the Renaissance, and you could set it during the 1890s or the 1920s or the 1950s. The Atomic Age has brought it around again, and we're following a secret society. We're following a group of scholars who keep learning and relearning the same truths as they go through their lives, or a family that passes down a secret, or a secret society that passes down a commandment, and that sort of stuff. All of these opportunities for setting up play rely on the flexibility of the players to get involved with a recurring situation across time with different characters, but characters tied to a particular idea, such as family or a secret society. And I find a lot of fertile ground there to plant seeds of inspiration that grow into really cool games. But anyway, thanks for those calls, and thanks for this opportunity to talk a little bit about a part of gaming and a part of campaign play that I find particularly satisfying, and that I miss quite a bit in kind of this new reality of online gaming and shorter game times and the challenges of modern scheduling and all those things, which make it harder to bring out these more nuanced types of campaign play. But anyway, until the next episode, take care. I'm going to place this here as a postscript, and I get the feeling that there's probably going to be some other postscripts. So even if I say goodbye, I may not have actually said goodbye. So I don't really mean goodbye until I start talking about icy cold Coca-Colas. Anyway, here's the postscript. On April 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, I'll be the guest on a roundtable hosted by Third Floor Wars. My host will be Craig Shipman of Third Floor Wars, and my fellow guest will be Seth Skorkowski of the Seth Skorkowski YouTube channel fame. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. Our ostensible topic will be game mastering. So could be a lot of fun. This is the third of the roundtable events hosted by Craig at Third Floor Wars. The first one featured John Harper and Sean Nittner, John Harper from Blades in the Dark. And the second featured Navi Drake and Spencer Campbell. It was recently released, and you can find these on Craig's YouTube channel. He also hosts them on Twitch. So, April 28th, which is a Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. If this sounds interesting to you, please make a note and join in live. Otherwise, take care. Just one final note. I thought this episode was finished, but I wanted to point out to people who listen to me but who do not yet listen to the Nerds RPG Variety Cast run by Jason Connerly. On April 1st, but not connected to April 1st, Jason released a long and very interesting episode from my point of view, where he collected a large number, I think 21 was the number, of listener call-ins to talk about the games that they own, that they want to play, that they aren't playing, that they haven't been able to play, or that something has prevented them from playing. I love this kind of interaction with the community. It shows just how diverse our interests can be, how many different types of games and different ways to play there are out there, even when we're talking about a small sample of people who listen to one particular podcast. And so it could be assumed to have very similar tastes. But if you haven't heard that episode yet, I strongly recommend you go over to the Nerds RPG Variety Cast and listen to that episode. And if it catches your fancy, there's a similar episode from the month before where people talk about their 3 favorite role-playing systems. This is also a lot of fun. Anyway, let's talk about this show. if you don't know. If you do know about this show and about me, then stop listening now, right? Save yourself, run off, go to the kitchen, get a nice icy cold glass of Coke, and relax. Your work is done. You've been listening to the Casting Shadows podcast, hopefully on wherever you can conveniently listen to any of your other podcasts, but is released originally via Anchor. If you're interested in hearing more of what I have to say, but not actually hearing me say it, reading it instead, you can travel to castingshadowsblog.com, a WordPress blog, which has been going for 12 years now. And while it doesn't have a daily release rate or anything like that, I do hope that there might be something there that gives you some momentary enjoyment to read. And if it sparks a question or a comment, feel free to leave a comment there or here or any of the other places where you can reach me online. The last thing I should mention would be our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/RuneSlinger, which has been going for quite a while as well, and has a wide variety of videos and actual play videos, all focused on role-playing games and what they mean to us, with specific focus on games maybe not entirely on the beaten track, although some are pretty big games. Anyway, until the next time, this is it. This is really the end. It's okay. You can turn it off. Take care.